The valets at the Sterling had seen everything in their 15 years of operation, but the sight of a woman sobbing against a silver Bentley in the executive parking garage was unusual enough to warrant a discreet call to security. Marcus Whitmore, however, intercepted that call before it reached anyone else. He'd been heading toward that very Bentley, his mind still churning through the acquisition papers he'd just signed, when he spotted her, a figure hunched against his driver's side door, her shoulders shaking with the kind of tears that came from somewhere deep and broken. He should have been irritated. Marcus Whitmore didn't do complications, and a stranger using his $60,000 vehicle as a crying post certainly qualified as one. Yet something about the way she held herself, the desperate quietness of her grief, made him pause. She wore a simple black dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair had fallen loose from what must have been a careful updo. In her hand, she clutched a phone like it was both her lifeline and her executioner. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice softer than he'd intended. "That's my car." The woman's head snapped up, and Marcus found himself looking into the reddest, most devastated pair of hazel eyes he'd ever seen. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe early 30s, with the kind of face that would have been striking if it weren't currently blotchy and swollen from crying. Recognition flashed across her features, not of him personally, but of what his presence meant. She was trespassing, and she knew it. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she stammered, pushing herself away from the Bentley as if it had burned her. She swiped frantically at her face, smearing mascara across her cheeks. I didn't mean to. I just needed a minute, and this level was empty, and I thought—" Her voice broke again, and fresh tears spilled down her face despite her obvious efforts to contain them. Marcus had been about to dismiss her with a nod and continue on his way. He had a reservation at Michelin-starred Chez Laurent in 40 minutes, a blind date his sister had orchestrated with some museum curator who supposedly shared his appreciation for Impressionist art. It was the last thing he wanted to do after a 14-hour workday, but Caroline had been persistent, and he'd finally relented just to stop her meddling in his personal life. But this woman looked so utterly shattered that even his well-practiced emotional detachment wavered. "What happened?" he heard himself ask. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Everything, nothing. I don't even know anymore." She looked down at her phone again, and her face crumpled. "I'm sorry, you don't need to hear this. I'll go." "Wait." Marcus surprised himself again. "Are you hurt? Do you need me to call someone?" "No, She took a shaky breath. "I'm not hurt. Not physically, anyway. Another breath, deeper this time. "I got stood up, which is humiliating enough, but I also just realized I can't afford the parking fee because I spent my last $40 on this stupid dress at a thrift store, and my babysitter charges by the hour, and my daughter—" Her voice hitched. "My daughter has been looking forward to me going on this date all week because she thinks if Mommy meets someone nice, maybe we won't have to move again, and I don't know how to tell her that nice men don't actually exist, at least not for women like me." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Marcus could see the moment she realized she'd just unloaded her entire personal crisis onto a complete stranger in a parking garage. Her eyes widened with mortification. "I cannot believe I just said all of that to you," she whispered. "Please forget everything you just heard. I'm going to go die of embarrassment now." But Marcus's analytical mind had already catalogued several important details. Single mother, financial stress, stood up on what was clearly an important date. And something about the way she'd mentioned her daughter, the catch in her voice, the fierce protective love underneath the desperation, had struck something in him he'd thought long dormant. "What's your daughter's name?" he found himself asking. The question clearly caught her off guard. "What? Your daughter? You said she's been excited about tonight. What's her name?" "Grace." The woman's expression softened immediately, the way parents' faces always did when talking about their children. "She's 7. She's with my neighbor right now, probably watching way too much television and eating cereal for dinner, because that's all I had time to leave for them." Fresh tears threatened. "She deserves so much better than this." Marcus made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew him. Marcus Whitmore was methodical, calculated, and never impulsive. His business success stemmed from his ability to think 3 moves ahead and never let emotion cloud his judgment. Yet here he was, about to throw his entire evening off course for a crying stranger in a parking garage. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, pulling out his wallet. "I'm going to pay your parking fee, and I'm going to call you a car to take you home to Grace. No arguments," he added when she opened her mouth to protest. Consider it an apology for the male species being generally terrible. I can't accept that, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You don't even know me. I could be a con artist who makes up sob stories in parking garages. Are you? No, but... Then we're settled. Marcus pulled out several bills and pressed them into her hand before she could refuse. The parking fee and the car service, and extra for your babysitter, since you're running late. She stared at the money in her hand like it was something foreign. When she looked up at him again, her eyes were swimming with a different kind of tears. Why are you doing this? It was a fair question, and Marcus didn't have a good answer. Or rather, he had too many answers, none of which he wanted to examine too closely. Something about her reminded him of his mother, of the years after his father died when she'd worked 3 jobs and still came up short. Something about her fierce love for her daughter resonated with the part of him that still remembered being a scared kid who'd promised himself he'd never let anyone he loved struggle like that again. Let's call it paying forward some kindness I once received, he said instead. She clutched the bills and he could see her pride warring with her practicality. Practicality won. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means. I'm Victoria, by the way. Victoria Chen, no, that's... She caught herself looking flustered. I mean Victoria Russell. I kept my married name for Grace's sake, even though... She stopped herself again. I'm sorry. You don't need my life story. Victoria Russell, Marcus repeated, and the name felt significant somehow, though he couldn't say why. He extended his hand. Marcus Whitmore. Her hand was small in his, and he noticed the calluses on her palms, the hands of someone who worked hard for everything she had. When she realized whose hand she was shaking, her eyes widened. Wait, Marcus Whitmore as in Whitmore Enterprises? As in the Marcus Whitmore who just bought the Henderson building downtown? Guilty. Oh my God. She looked down at the money in her hand, then back at him. This is too weird. I can't take this. You're you, and I'm someone who needs help getting home to her daughter, Marcus finished. That's all that matters right now. Victoria looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. Okay, she said softly. Okay, thank you, really. She hesitated, then added, I hope your evening goes better than mine did. Marcus thought about his impending blind date, about the predictable conversation he'd have with a woman he'd never see again, about the emptiness of his penthouse apartment waiting for him afterward. I'm sure it will be exactly what I expect, he said, which wasn't really an answer at all. As he watched Victoria walk toward the elevator, something made him call out, Victoria! She turned back. The man who stood you up tonight? He's an idiot. A genuine smile broke through her tears for the first time, transforming her face. That's kind of you to say. After she disappeared into the elevator, Marcus stood alone in the parking garage, his phone buzzing with a text from his sister. Don't you dare bail on this date. Jennifer is perfect for you. Successful, cultured, beautiful. Give her a chance. Marcus looked at the text, then at the elevator doors where Victoria had vanished. He thought about genuine smiles and hard-working hands, and the fierce love in a mother's voice when she said her daughter's name. Then he thought about another perfectly pleasant evening with another perfectly suitable woman who would leave him feeling perfectly empty. He typed back. Something came up. Rescheduling. Caroline's response was immediate and predictable. Marcus, you promised. But Marcus was already walking back toward the elevator, an idea forming in his mind that was either brilliant or completely insane. He'd built a billion-dollar empire on his instincts, and right now every instinct he had was telling him that the woman who'd been crying against his car was about to become very important to his life. He just had to figure out how to see her again without seeming like a stalker or a savior complex case, which, he reflected as the elevator carried him back up to his office, was a problem that all his business acumen hadn't prepared him to solve. Victoria Russell stood in the doorway of her tiny apartment, watching her daughter sleep. Grace's small chest rose and fell with the peaceful rhythm of childhood dreams, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tight against her heart. The unicorn nightlight cast soft purple shadows across her face, making her look even younger than 7. Victoria felt the familiar ache of loving someone so much it physically hurt. She fell asleep about 20 minutes ago, whispered Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who babysat whenever Victoria could afford it. Kept asking when you'd be home. Said she wanted to hear all about your Prince Charming. Victoria's throat tightened. There was no Prince Charming, Mrs. Patterson. Just another frog. The older woman's expression softened with sympathy. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry. Don't be, I'm used to it." Victoria handed her the money Marcus had given her, keeping only what she needed for groceries. Mrs. Patterson tried to refuse the generous amount, but Victoria insisted. The woman survived on Social Security and deserved every penny. After Mrs. Patterson left, Victoria collapsed onto her second-hand couch and finally let herself think about what had happened in that parking garage. Marcus Whitmore. The Marcus Whitmore. She'd seen his picture in the business section of the newspaper just last week. Something about his company's expansion into renewable energy. Even in black and white newsprint, his presence had been commanding. Sharp jawline, intense eyes, the kind of confidence that came from never having to question your place in the world. And she'd broken down crying all over his car like some damsel in distress from a bad romance novel. Victoria groaned and covered her face with her hands. The humiliation was almost worse than being stood up by Trevor, the accountant from the dating app who'd seemed nice enough in his messages. They'd planned to meet at the Sterling's restaurant, her one splurge because she'd wanted to feel special for once. She'd arrived 15 minutes early, nervous and excited, only to wait 45 minutes before checking her phone to find his brief message. Something came up. Can't make it. No apology, no explanation. Just 38 words that somehow managed to make her feel completely worthless. She'd fled to the parking garage because she couldn't bear the pitying looks from the hostess who'd watched her wait. And then she'd lost it completely. All the stress and fear and exhaustion of the past 3 years finally overwhelming her defenses. 3 years since Michael had left. 3 years of struggling to make ends meet, of choosing between groceries and heat, of watching her daughter grow up too fast because she had to understand why they couldn't afford things other kids had. And then Marcus Whitmore had appeared like something out of a fever dream. And instead of calling security or treating her like the mess she was, he'd shown her more kindness than she'd experienced in months. Victoria pulled out her phone and Googled him. Something she probably should have done before accepting money from a stranger. The search results were extensive. Marcus Whitmore, 38, CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, net worth estimated at $3.2 billion, bachelor, philanthropist. Known for his ruthless business tactics and his refusal to discuss his personal life. There were photos of him at charity galas, always in a tuxedo, always alone or with his sister, never with a date. She clicked on a recent interview from Forbes. The journalist had asked about his relationship status, and his response had been characteristically brief. "I'm married to my work. It's a demanding spouse." Victoria closed her phone, feeling foolish. Men like Marcus Whitmore didn't randomly help single mothers in parking garages out of the goodness of their hearts. He'd probably felt sorry for her, the way people felt sorry for homeless people they passed on the street. A momentary charitable impulse that he'd forget by tomorrow. She needed to forget about it too. Forget about his kind eyes and his gentle voice and the way he'd asked about Grace like her daughter actually mattered to a stranger. She had more important things to worry about. Like the notice from her landlord, giving her 60 days to vacate because the building was being converted to condos. Like the fact that her job as a home health aide barely covered expenses, even with the extra shifts. Like Grace's growing questions about why they never stayed anywhere long, why they couldn't get a dog, why other kids had daddies who came to school events and she didn't. Victoria was so lost in her spiraling thoughts that she almost missed the soft knock on her door. She glanced at the clock. Nearly 10 at night. Mrs. Patterson must have forgotten something. But when she opened the door, Marcus Whitmore stood in her hallway, looking impossibly out of place in his expensive suit among the peeling wallpaper and flickering fluorescent lights. Victoria's brain short-circuited. "What? Why are you here?" "I owe you an apology," Marcus said, and he actually looked uncomfortable, which somehow made him more human. "I realized after you left that I essentially threw money at you and sent you away like you were a problem to be solved. That was patronizing, and I'm sorry. You followed me home to apologize for being nice to me?" Victoria couldn't keep the incredulity out of her voice. "When you put it like that, it sounds creepy." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. "I promise I'm not a stalker, your parking ticket had your license plate, and I have resources, and—" He stopped himself. "That's not helping, is it?" Despite everything, Victoria felt a laugh bubble up. "You used your billionaire resources to track down the crying woman from the parking garage so you could apologize for helping her. That's either the sweetest or the strangest thing anyone's ever done for me." "Probably both," Marcus admitted. A smile tugged at his lips, and Victoria noticed how it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less intimidating. Look, the truth is, I cancelled my plans tonight, and I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About your daughter believing that you finding someone nice would solve your problems. And I thought... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I thought maybe we could help each other. Help each other, Victoria repeated slowly. I'm not sure what a billionaire CEO could possibly need help with. My sister is determined to marry me off, Marcus said. She sets me up on blind dates with what she calls suitable women, and I keep cancelling because I can't stand the pretense of it all. Meanwhile, you need someone to convince your daughter that nice men exist. So I'm proposing a deal. Victoria crossed her arms, suddenly wary. What kind of deal? Let me take you to dinner. A proper date. Not some jerk who stands you up. You get to go home and tell Grace about your evening, and I get to tell my sister I actually went on a date and bought myself some time before she ambushes me with another setup. That's the most transactional romantic proposition I've ever heard, Victoria said, but she was intrigued despite herself. I prefer to think of it as mutually beneficial, Marcus countered. No expectations, no pressure, just two people having a meal and maybe some decent conversation. Victoria studied him, trying to figure out his angle. Men like Marcus Whitmore didn't do anything without a reason, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't saying. But she was also tired of being suspicious of every kindness, of assuming the worst about everyone. Why me? She asked finally. You could have any woman you wanted. Why track down the mess from the parking garage? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice was softer than before. You reminded me that there are real stakes in people's lives, real problems that can't be solved with a board meeting or an acquisition. And when you talked about your daughter, he paused. My mother raised me alone after my father died. I watched her struggle and sacrifice and love me fiercely through all of it. I know what you're doing for Grace, even if she's too young to understand it yet, and I respect it. The words hit Victoria harder than she expected. She'd been so focused on her failures that she'd forgotten to see her own strength. Here was a man who'd built an empire, and he was telling her he respected her. I don't need charity, she said, but her voice was gentler now. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering dinner with someone who won't stand you up. Unless that's too low a bar. Victoria surprised herself by laughing. When you put it that way, how can I refuse? Is that a yes? She should say no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a bad idea, that she was setting herself up for disappointment, that men like Marcus Whitmore existed in a different universe and she was fooling herself if she thought otherwise. But Grace's face appeared in her mind, hopeful, trusting, believing that good things could happen. And Victoria realized she needed to believe that too, even if just for one evening, Saturday night, she said, but somewhere normal, not someplace where the menu doesn't have prices, and we split the check. Absolutely not. Marcus, I'm old-fashioned about some things. Humor me. Victoria narrowed her eyes. Are all billionaires this stubborn? Only the successful ones. His smile was genuine now, warm and slightly mischievous. I'll pick you up at 7? Make it 7:30. Grace goes to bed at 7, and I need to make sure she's asleep before I leave. 7:30 it is. Marcus pulled out his phone. I should get your number. You know, so I can confirm our not-a-date date. Victoria rattled off her number, still half convinced she was dreaming. As Marcus turned to leave, she called out to him, Marcus, thank you. For tonight, I mean. For everything. He looked back at her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. Thank you for saying yes, Victoria. I have a feeling Saturday night is going to be much more interesting than any blind date my sister could have arranged. After he left, Victoria leaned against her closed door, trying to process what had just happened. She'd gone from the lowest point of her week to having a date with a billionaire who'd tracked her down to apologize for being too nice. It was absurd. It was improbable. It was exactly the kind of fairy tale Grace believed in. Victoria pushed away from the door and walked back to her daughter's room. Grace had rolled over, her rabbit now abandoned on the pillow beside her. Victoria brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, Maybe Mommy did meet someone nice after all, baby. We'll see. As she climbed into her own bed, Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sleep well, Victoria, and don't worry. I promise to be on time Saturday. She saved the number under Marcus and typed back, You better be. Grace doesn't tolerate lateness. His response came immediately. I wouldn't dream of disappointing Grace or her mother. Victoria fell asleep with a smile on her face, something that hadn't happened in longer than she cared to remember. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that this was too good to be true, that she was setting herself up for heartbreak. But for once she decided to ignore that voice and let herself hope. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Victoria threw herself into work, caring for her elderly clients with the same dedication she always had, but her mind kept drifting to Saturday night. She caught herself checking her phone constantly, half expecting Marcus to cancel, to realize he'd made a mistake getting involved with someone so far beneath his social stratum. But every evening, a text would arrive, nothing elaborate, just small check-ins that felt surprisingly natural. How was your day? Grace doing okay? Still on for Saturday? Sometimes he'd share details about his own day, complaints about tedious board meetings or his sister's continued meddling. Victoria found herself looking forward to those messages more than she wanted to admit. On Thursday night, panic set in. She had exactly one dress suitable for a date, and it was the same thrift store outfit she'd worn when Trevor stood her up. Wearing it again felt like bad luck, but she couldn't afford anything else. She was staring into her pathetic closet when her phone rang. I need your dress size, came Marcus's voice without preamble. Excuse me? Your dress size and your shoe size. Don't argue with me, Victoria. I wasn't planning to argue. I was planning to ask why my billionaire not a date needs my measurements. That's not creepy at all. She heard him chuckle. My assistant is very good at shopping, and I remembered you said you'd spent your last $40 on the dress you wore the other night. Consider it part of the deal. You need appropriate attire for the place I'm taking you. Marcus, I told you somewhere normal. It is normal for me. Just trust me, okay? Dress size? Victoria sighed, knowing she was fighting a losing battle. 8 and size 7 shoes. But Marcus, you really don't have to. Too late. Already texted my assistant. She'll have something delivered tomorrow. He paused. And Victoria, stop worrying about what you can and can't afford. For one night, just let yourself enjoy something nice. After he hung up, Victoria sat on her bed, emotions swirling. Part of her bristled at his high-handedness, at the way he just assumed he could solve her problems with money. But another part, the part that was so tired of struggling, of always having to be strong, wanted to let someone else take care of things for once. The next day, a delivery arrived at her door. Not one dress, but 3, each more beautiful than the last. One was a deep emerald green that brought out her eyes, another a classic navy blue, and the third, a soft rose color that looked like something from a movie. There were shoes to match each dress, all from designers she'd only seen in magazine ads. A note in elegant handwriting read, "Choose whichever makes you feel most beautiful. You deserve to feel that way." Victoria tried on all 3, and when Grace came home from school, her daughter's eyes went wide. "Mommy, you look like a princess," Grace breathed, watching Victoria twirl in the green dress. "Is this for your date tomorrow?" "Yes, baby. The nice man I told you about sent these." Grace's face lit up with the kind of pure joy only children could manage. "He sent you 3 dresses. That's so romantic, like in the movies." She grabbed Victoria's hands. "Mommy, is he going to be my new daddy?" Victoria's heart clenched. "Oh, sweetheart, it's just one dinner. We barely know each other." "But he's nice, right? You said he was really nice." "He is nice, but nice doesn't always mean forever, okay? I don't want you to get your hopes up." Grace's expression turned serious beyond her years. "Is it because of what Daddy did? Is that why you don't believe in forever anymore?" The question pierced Victoria like a knife. How did her 7-year-old daughter understand so much? "Baby, what your father did has nothing to do with this. I just want you to understand that sometimes things don't work out, even when we want them to." "But sometimes they do work out, right?" Grace insisted. "Mrs. Patterson says you have to believe in good things before they can happen, so I'm going to believe really hard that this nice man is going to make you smile the way you used to." Victoria pulled her daughter into a tight hug, fighting back tears. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm 7 now, Mommy. That's practically grown up." Saturday evening arrived too quickly, and not quickly enough. Victoria had chosen the green dress. It made her feel confident and elegant, 2 things she hadn't felt in years. She'd managed to tame her hair into soft waves and applied makeup with a hand that only trembled slightly. When she looked in the mirror, She barely recognized herself. Grace watched the entire preparation process with rapt attention, offering commentary on lipstick choices and insisting that Victoria wear the delicate silver earrings that had been her grandmother's. When the doorbell rang at exactly 7:30, Grace practically vibrated with excitement. "I'll get it," she shouted, racing to the door before Victoria could stop her. Victoria's heart hammered as she heard her daughter's voice. "Are you the nice man who's taking my mommy on a date?" "I am." Marcus's voice was warm and amused. "You must be Grace. Your mother has told me a lot about you." "She told me about you too. She said you helped her when she was sad, and that makes you a hero like in my books." Victoria rushed to the door, mortified. "Grace, honey, let Mr. Whitmore come in." But when she saw Marcus, her breath caught. He wore dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that somehow made him look both casual and devastatingly handsome. He was holding a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a wrapped package in the other. When his eyes met hers, his expression shifted into something that made her feel warm all over. "You look incredible," he said softly. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she managed, trying to ignore the way her pulse raced. Marcus turned his attention back to Grace, crouching down to her eye level. "These are for your mother," he said, handing Victoria the flowers. "But these are for you." He offered Grace the package. Grace looked at Victoria for permission, and at her mother's nod, carefully unwrapped the gift. Inside was a leather-bound edition of fairy tales, the kind with beautiful illustrations on every page. Grace's eyes went wide. "This is the most beautiful book I've ever seen," she whispered reverently. "Your mother mentioned you love stories," Marcus said. "I thought you might enjoy this collection. Some of them are classics, but there are a few you might not have read before." Victoria felt her throat tighten. It was such a thoughtful gift, something that showed he'd actually listened when she'd talked about her daughter. Not expensive toys or flashy presents, but something that honored who Grace was. "What do you say, Grace?" Victoria prompted gently. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I'm going to read one every night before bed." Grace hugged the book to her chest, then looked up at Marcus with startling seriousness. "You're going to take good care of my mommy tonight, right? And bring her home safe?" "I promise," Marcus said solemnly. "Your mother is in very good hands." Mrs. Patterson arrived moments later to babysit, and after multiple hugs and reminders from Grace to have the best time ever, Victoria finally found herself alone with Marcus in the elevator. "Sorry about the interrogation," she said. "Grace has appointed herself my personal guardian." "She's protective of you, that's good. It means you've raised her right," Marcus smiled. "Besides, I liked her. She's got spirit." "She's got too much spirit sometimes," Victoria said, but there was no heat in it. "The book was incredibly thoughtful." "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to. She's important to you, which means she's important." The simple statement made Victoria's chest feel tight. When was the last time someone had acknowledged that Grace wasn't just an accessory to her life, but a fundamental part of who she was? Marcus drove them to a restaurant on the waterfront, not the Sterling, but a smaller, more intimate place with soft lighting and a view of the harbour. It was elegant without being pretentious, the kind of place where Victoria could almost forget about the enormous gap between their worlds. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Marcus asked about her work, seemed genuinely interested in the elderly clients she cared for. He told her about growing up poor in Queens, about his mother's determination to give him opportunities she'd never had, about building his first business from $1,000 he'd saved working construction jobs. "I thought you came from money," Victoria admitted. "Most people do. I let them think that because it makes negotiations easier. But the truth is, I was a scholarship kid who ate ramen for 2 years straight and slept in my office because I couldn't afford rent." He met her eyes. "I remember what it's like to choose between electricity and groceries, Victoria. I haven't forgotten where I came from." The revelation shifted something between them. He wasn't just a billionaire in a tower. He was someone who'd fought his way up from circumstances not unlike her own. Someone who understood struggle in a way that made her feel less alone. They were sharing dessert when Victoria's phone buzzed insistently. She glanced at it and felt her blood turn to ice. Mrs. Patterson's name flashed on the screen. She wouldn't call unless something was wrong. "I'm sorry, I have to take this," Victoria said, answering immediately. "Mrs. Patterson, is Grace okay?" "She's fine, dear, but we have a problem. Your ex-husband is here. Michael. He's at your door demanding to see Grace, saying he has rights. I didn't let him in, but he's making quite a scene in the hallway. and I'm worried the neighbors will call the police. Victoria's world tilted. Michael. Here. After 3 years of nothing, no calls, no child support, no acknowledgement that he had a daughter, he'd decided to show up tonight of all nights. I'm coming home right now, she said, already standing. Don't let him near her. I'll be there in 15 minutes. She hung up and looked at Marcus, trying to keep her voice steady. I need to go home. My ex-husband showed up unexpectedly. And Grace, her voice broke. I'm sorry. I know this is... Don't apologize. Marcus was already signaling for the check. Let's go, I'll drive you. In the car, Victoria's hands shook as she tried to call Michael. It went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. Michael only communicated on his own terms, which usually meant when it caused maximum chaos. Talk to me, Marcus said quietly as he navigated traffic. What's the situation with your ex? He left 3 years ago, found someone younger, richer, more exciting, told me he wasn't cut out for fatherhood, and signed away his parental rights without a second thought. I haven't heard from him since, and neither has Grace. And now he just shows up. Anger replaced her panic. What gives him the right to walk back into her life whenever he feels like it? Legally, if he signed away his rights, I know legally he has no claim, but that doesn't stop him from showing up and confusing her, making promises he won't keep. That's what he does, Marcus. He destroys things. Marcus's jaw tightened, and Victoria saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Not tonight. He doesn't. They pulled up to her building 13 minutes later, and Victoria could hear Michael's voice echoing in the stairwell before they even reached her floor. He was arguing with Mrs. Patterson, his tone aggressive and entitled. My daughter, and I have every right to see her. You can't keep me from my own child, you interfering old... You signed away that right when you abandoned her. Mrs. Patterson shot back with more fire than Victoria had ever heard from her. You don't get to waltz back in whenever... Victoria rounded the corner with Marcus close behind. Michael! Her ex-husband spun around, and Victoria was struck by how little he'd changed. Same charming smile, same expensive haircut, same ability to look at her like she was something unpleasant he'd stepped in. His eyes flicked to Marcus, and she saw calculation replace anger. Victoria, finally. Call off your guard dog so I can see my daughter. She's not your daughter anymore, Victoria said, her voice cold. You made that very clear 3 years ago. What are you doing here? I made a mistake, okay? I've been thinking about Grace, about what I gave up. I want to be part of her life again. His tone was practiced, rehearsed. Victoria had heard variations of this speech before, always when he wanted something. What do you really want, Michael? Because we both know this isn't about Grace. His mask slipped slightly. Christine left me. Took half of everything. I'm starting over, and I thought Grace deserves to know her father. Convenient timing, Marcus said quietly, speaking for the first time. Michael's attention snapped to him. And who the hell are you? Someone who actually shows up, Marcus replied evenly. Unlike you. Michael's eyes narrowed as recognition dawned. Wait, you're Marcus Whitmore. I've seen your picture in the... He laughed, the sound ugly. Oh, this is perfect. Victoria trades up from a middle-class accountant to a billionaire. Well played. Using the kid as bait works every time, doesn't it? Victoria saw Marcus tense, but before he could respond, she stepped between them. Years of buried rage bubbled to the surface. Get out, she said, her voice shaking with fury. You don't get to show up after 3 years and judge my life. You don't get to use Grace as a pawn when your own life falls apart. And you sure as hell don't get to stand here and insult me in my own home. I have rights. You have nothing. You signed papers. You walked away. And you know what? Grace is better off without you. She's smart and kind and brave, and she didn't learn any of that from you. So take your regrets and your manipulation and get out of our lives. Michael's face flushed red. You can't keep me from her forever. Actually, she can, Marcus said, his tone glacial. And if you continue to harass her, or attempt to see Grace without following proper legal channels, I'll make sure you spend every penny you have left fighting a restraining order. Do we understand each other? Something in Marcus's voice must have penetrated Michael's bravado. He looked between them, seemed to realize he'd lost this round, and held up his hands in mock surrender. Fine. Have your fairy tale. But when he figures out what you really are, a broke single mother with nothing to offer, don't come crying to me. He turned and headed for the stairs, throwing one last comment over his shoulder. Grace deserves better than whatever this is. After he disappeared, Victoria felt her legs give out. Marcus caught her, guiding her to sit on the hallway floor. Mrs. Patterson hovered anxiously. "Is Grace?" Victoria managed. "Asleep. I kept her in the bedroom with the TV on. She never heard any of it." Relief flooded through Victoria, immediately followed by humiliation. This was supposed to be a perfect evening, and instead Marcus had witnessed the messy reality of her life, the toxic ex, the financial struggles, the chaos that seemed to follow her everywhere. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I didn't mean for you to—" "Stop," Marcus said firmly. He knelt beside her, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "You have nothing to apologize for." "He does. And Victoria, what he said about you having nothing to offer, he's wrong. You're raising an incredible daughter. You work hard. You have more strength in your little finger than he'll ever have. Don't let his poison make you doubt that." Victoria searched his face for any sign that this had changed things, that he'd realized she came with too much baggage. But all she saw was fierce protectiveness, and something deeper that made her heart race. "Why are you being so good to me?" she asked. "We barely know each other." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Because seeing you fight for your daughter reminds me why I built my empire in the first place, to protect the people I care about from feeling powerless. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I haven't felt this alive in years, Victoria. You make me want to be the man Grace thinks I am." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to name. Victoria became acutely aware of how close they were, of the way Marcus's hand still cupped her cheek, of the intensity in his gaze that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced. "I should check on Grace," she finally said, though she didn't move. "You should," Marcus agreed, not moving either. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat pointedly. "I'll just go make some tea." The spell broke. Marcus helped Victoria to her feet, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. "I should go. Let you recover from tonight's excitement." "Marcus," Victoria caught his arm as he turned to leave. "Thank you. For everything. For the dress and the book and the dinner, and especially for having my back with Michael. I'm not used to anyone being on my team." "Get used to it," he said softly. "Because I'm not going anywhere, Victoria. Not unless you tell me to." After he left, Victoria checked on Grace, still peacefully asleep, unaware of the drama, then collapsed onto her couch. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Sleep well." And Victoria, "Tonight wasn't ruined. Getting to see how fiercely you protect your daughter just made me respect you more." She stared at the message, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. This was supposed to be simple, one dinner to help each other out. But something had shifted tonight, something that felt dangerous and thrilling and terrifyingly real. Another text arrived. "Same time next week? I promise, less ex-husband drama." Victoria smiled despite everything and typed back, "It's a date." A real one this time. "The realist," came his response, followed by, "Sweet dreams, Victoria Russell." She fell asleep that night with her phone clutched in her hand, wondering if maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could happen to people like her after all. The next 8 weeks unfolded like a dream Victoria kept expecting to wake from. Marcus didn't just take her to dinner once. He showed up consistently, reliably, becoming a fixture in her and Grace's life with an ease that should have been terrifying, but somehow felt natural. He came to Grace's school play, sitting in the audience beside Victoria and cheering louder than anyone when Grace played a dancing flower. He helped Victoria move when her building's conversion deadline arrived, using his connections to find her an affordable apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. He never made her feel like charity, always framing things as favors between friends, investments in people he cared about, and somewhere along the way, without either of them quite planning it, they'd fallen in love. Victoria knew the exact moment it happened for her. Marcus had surprised them with a trip to the aquarium on a rainy Saturday. Grace had pressed her face against the glass of the shark tank, chattering excitedly about hammerheads and great whites, and Marcus had crouched beside her, answering her endless questions with the same patience he probably used in boardrooms. When Grace had impulsively hugged him, declaring him the best grown-up friend ever, Marcus had looked at Victoria with such raw emotion that she'd felt her heart simply surrender. She was in love with Marcus Whitmore, completely, irrevocably, terrifyingly in love, but she hadn't told him, because how could she? Despite the past 2 months, despite the way he looked at her and the careful way he'd integrated himself into their lives, She couldn't shake the fear that this was temporary. That eventually, he'd realize what Michael had said was true, that she had nothing to offer a man like him except complications and responsibilities that weren't his to bear. It was Caroline, Marcus's sister, who finally forced the issue. Victoria had met Caroline 3 weeks earlier at a charity gala Marcus had invited her to. She'd expected polite distance, maybe even hostility, from the sister who'd been trying to set Marcus up with suitable women. Instead, Caroline had pulled her aside within 15 minutes and said, "Thank God, someone real. My brother has been sleepwalking through life for years, and you woke him up." Now Caroline was calling Victoria directly, which seemed ominous. "We need to talk," Caroline said without preamble when Victoria answered, "Can you meet me for coffee, without Marcus?" Victoria's stomach dropped. "Is something wrong? Is Marcus okay?" "He's fine. Physically. Emotionally, he's a disaster, but that's why I need to talk to you. Tomorrow at 10, there's a cafe on 5th Street called Roasted Dreams." The next morning, Victoria left Grace with Mrs. Patterson and met Caroline at the cafe, her nerves jangling. Caroline was already there, looking effortlessly elegant in designer clothes that probably cost more than Victoria's monthly rent. "Thank you for coming," Caroline said, gesturing to the latte she'd already ordered for Victoria. "I know this is weird, but I'm worried about my brother, and you're the only person who can help. What's going on?" Caroline studied her for a moment. "Do you know why Marcus never dates seriously? Why he built those walls around himself? He mentioned your mother, how hard things were after your father died. That's part of it. But there's more." Caroline took a breath. 10 years ago, Marcus was engaged. Her name was Amanda. She came from money, seemed perfect on paper. 3 months before the wedding, Marcus overheard her on the phone with a friend. She was laughing about how she'd landed the ambitious poor kid, and how once they were married, she'd shape him into a proper society husband. She never loved him. She loved his potential, his money, the status he could give her. Victoria's heart ached. Oh God. He called off the wedding, threw himself into building his empire. And he's been alone ever since, convinced that anyone who gets close to him just wants something from him. Money, status, connections, never just him. Caroline leaned forward. "Until you. You're the first person in a decade who's made him believe he could be more than a bank account with a pulse. But Victoria, he's terrified. He won't tell you how he feels because he's convinced you'll eventually realize you could do better." "Better?" Victoria nearly laughed. "Caroline, I'm a home health aide who lives paycheck to paycheck. He's a billionaire. If anyone's going to wake up and realize they could do better..." "Stop." Caroline's voice was sharp. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that's keeping both of you miserable. My brother doesn't care about money. He cares about authenticity, about people who see him as a person, not a portfolio, and you do that. You and Grace make him happy in a way I haven't seen since before Amanda destroyed his ability to trust. Why are you telling me this? Because tonight is the anniversary of the day he was supposed to marry Amanda. He always spirals on this date, convinces himself he's better off alone, and I think if you don't tell him how you feel tonight, he's going to pull away. Not because he wants to, but because he's scared, and scared Marcus makes terrible decisions." Victoria's mind raced. "I don't know what to say to him. Tell him the truth. Tell him you love him, because you do, don't you?" "Yes," Victoria admitted, the word coming easier than she expected. "I'm completely in love with him. But what if..." "No what ifs, just truth. Can you do that?" Victoria nodded, even as panic clawed at her chest. "Okay. Yes, I'll tell him tonight." Caroline smiled, genuine warmth replacing her worry. "Good. And Victoria? Welcome to the family. I always wanted a sister." That evening, Marcus picked Victoria up as usual, but something was off. He was quieter than normal, distant in a way that made her nervous. They drove to their favorite restaurant, the waterfront place where they'd had their first dinner, but the easy conversation they usually shared felt strained. "Is everything okay?" Victoria finally asked over appetizers. "Fine," Marcus said automatically, then caught himself. "No, not fine. I've been thinking." Victoria's heart sank. Here it comes, she thought. The moment he tells me this was fun, but it's run its course. "I need to tell you something," Marcus continued, not meeting her eyes. "These past 2 months have been incredible. You and Grace have given me something I didn't think I'd ever have. But I also know I've been monopolizing your time, inserting myself into your life in ways that maybe aren't fair to you. You're young, Victoria. You should be dating people your own age, people without all my baggage and complications, people who could give you— Stop, Victoria interrupted, her voice shaking. Just stop, Marcus. Do you want to know what I think? He finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly broke her. I think you're scared, she said softly. I think someone hurt you badly, and you've been protecting yourself ever since. And I think right now you're trying to push me away before I can leave you. Am I close? Marcus's expression shuttered. Caroline told you. She told me about Amanda, about what she did to you. And Marcus, I am so sorry that happened. But I am not her. Victoria reached across the table, taking his hands in hers. I didn't fall in love with your money or your status or what you could give me. I fell in love with the man who asked about my daughter before he even knew my name. With the man who reads bedtime stories in funny voices and who remembers that Grace likes her pancakes shaped like hearts. With the man who looks at me like I'm something precious, even when I'm exhausted and covered in coffee stains from a double shift. Victoria. I'm not done. She squeezed his hands. You think I could do better? Marcus, you are the best thing that's happened to me in years. Not because you're rich, though I won't lie. The financial security is nice. But because you see me. You see, Grace? You show up every single time, no matter what. And I love you for that. I love you completely, messily, terrifyingly, and if you push me away because you're scared, you're going to break my heart and yours. Silence stretched between them. Marcus stared at their joined hands, his throat working. Say something, Victoria whispered. Please. When Marcus looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I love you too. God, Victoria, I've been in love with you since that night in the parking garage when you were crying over your daughter and worrying about your babysitter and still managed to care about whether I thought less of you. I've been terrified to tell you because I couldn't survive it if you were just with me for what I could provide. But you're right. I've been letting fear make my decisions, and I'm done with that. He stood abruptly, pulling Victoria to her feet. Other diners glanced over curiously, but Marcus didn't seem to notice or care. I don't want to date other people, he said firmly. I want you. I want Grace. I want messy mornings and school plays and arguments about whose turn it is to do the dishes. I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep knowing you're there. I want to be the man Grace thinks I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that this is real. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face. Is this— I'm saying I want forever, Victoria, if you'll have me. I know it's fast and I know we should probably take things slower, but I've wasted enough time pretending I don't feel what I feel. So I'm asking, will you take a chance on me? On us? Yes, Victoria breathed, and then louder. Yes, absolutely yes. Marcus pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made the restaurant full of strangers disappear. When they finally broke apart, Victoria was laughing and crying simultaneously. Grace is going to lose her mind, she said. She's been planning our wedding since our second date. Smart kid. Marcus grinned, looking younger and happier than she'd ever seen him. Though I should probably ask her permission before making this official. They left the restaurant hand in hand, both too excited to finish dinner. On the drive back to Victoria's apartment, Marcus talked about the future, about moving her and Grace into his penthouse if she wanted, about setting up a college fund for Grace, about all the ways he wanted to be part of their lives. But he also asked questions, wanted to know what Victoria wanted, made it clear this was a partnership, not a rescue. When they reached her apartment, Grace was still awake, reading her fairy tale book with Mrs. Patterson, though her eyes were drooping. She perked up immediately when she saw them. You're both smiling really big, Grace observed. Did something good happen? Marcus crouched down to her level, suddenly looking nervous. Grace, I need to ask you something important. Is it okay if I spend a lot more time with you and your mum? Like all the time, maybe even live with you? Grace's eyes went enormous. Like a family. Exactly like a family. Grace looked at Victoria, who nodded, tears threatening again. Then Grace launched herself at Marcus, wrapping her small arms around his neck. I told Mommy you were a hero, she said into his shoulder, and heroes always stay for the happy ending, right? Right, Marcus agreed, his voice thick with emotion. The happiest ending. Over Grace's head, Marcus met Victoria's eyes, and the look they exchanged needed no words. This was real. This was happening. They'd found each other in the most improbable way, and somehow, against all odds, they were going to make it work. Later, after Grace finally fell asleep clutching her fairy tale book, Victoria and Marcus sat on her tiny balcony, overlooking the city lights. "I keep thinking this is a dream," Victoria admitted, leaning against Marcus's shoulder. "That I'm going to wake up and be back in that parking garage, crying against your car. If this is a dream, I don't want to wake up either." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "Though I should probably thank whoever stood you up that night. If you hadn't been in that garage—" "Don't," Victoria shuddered. "I don't even want to think about it." "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment. "I have a question, though. When did you know that you loved me?" "The aquarium. When Grace hugged you and you looked at me like we were your whole world. When did you know?" "The parking garage," Marcus said immediately. "The second you mentioned Grace and I heard how much you loved her. I didn't recognize it as love then, but looking back, that's when you claimed my heart." Victoria tilted her head up to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, she said, "Grace is right, you know. You are a hero, my hero. Just doing what any decent person would do." "No," Victoria said firmly. "What you did, showing up, staying, loving us, that's not what everyone does. That's rare. That's special. And I'm going to spend every day making sure you know how grateful I am. You don't have to be grateful, Victoria. You just have to love me. That's the easiest thing in the world." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. Somewhere in the apartment, Grace was dreaming of fairy tales and happy endings. And for the first time in years, Victoria believed in those things too. Because sometimes the best love stories started in the most unexpected places. Sometimes cancelled dates led to destiny. And sometimes a woman crying in a parking garage and a billionaire with a guarded heart found exactly what they'd been missing in each other. 6 months later, Marcus and Victoria stood in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and family. Grace served as flower girl, beaming in her princess dress as she scattered rose petals. Caroline cried through the entire ceremony. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Grace's voice rang out, "I object. I want to say something." Everyone turned to look at her. Victoria started to apologize, but Grace was already running up to the altar. "I just wanted to say that I'm really happy Marcus is going to be my dad," Grace announced to the entire assembly. "Because he keeps his promises, and he makes my mommy smile, and he reads bedtime stories in funny voices. And that's what dads are supposed to do. So nobody should object, because this is the best thing ever." There wasn't a dry eye in the house. After the ceremony, as they danced under strings of lights, Marcus whispered in Victoria's ear, "Best blind date that never happened." Victoria laughed, pulling him closer. "Definitely the best, though technically you crashed my bad date." "Lucky for both of us," Marcus said, and kissed her as the music swelled and their daughter danced around them, already planning their happily ever after. Because that's what happened when you let yourself believe in second chances and unexpected love. You got your fairy tale, parking garage tears and all.